You will not make my mother cry again." The words were stark on the cheap foolscap, written in a woman's elegant hand but dictated by the heart of a child. Alistair Beaumont, the 9th Duke of Blackwood, read the sentence once, a tremor running through his powerful frame. He felt the coarse texture of the paper beneath his fingertips, a world away from the vellum and gilt-edged stationery that constituted his life. The ink was a simple, watery brown, not the deep black he used to sign documents that altered fortunes and redrew maps of estates. He read it a second time. "You will not make my mother cry again." It was not a request. It was a condition. A treaty offered by a 5-year-old sovereign of a kingdom built on driftwood and seafoam, a kingdom Alistair had only just discovered and had already laid waste to 5 years prior. His gaze lifted from the paper to the boy standing before him, a miniature sentinel guarding the doorway of the cramped, salt-stained cottage. The boy had his mother's fine, straight nose and the stubborn set of her chin. But the eyes, a startling deep shade of cobalt that could command or condemn with a single glance, were pure Blackwood. They were Alistair's own eyes, staring back at him from a face that should have been a source of pride, but was instead a monument to his catastrophic failure. Alistair looked past the boy to the woman standing in the shadows of the room, her silhouette a study in rigid defiance. Eleanor. She was thinner, the soft curves of her face honed to sharp, elegant angles by hardship. Her hands, once smooth and pale, were clasped before her, their knuckles reddened from work he could scarcely imagine. She was no longer the Duchess of Blackwood, a beautiful, placid ornament he had married for duty and lineage. She was a stranger named Ellen, a seamstress in a forgotten Cornish fishing village, and the mother of the son he had never known he had. He had destroyed her. He had believed the lies, the whispers, the expertly forged letters arranged by his own cousin. He had cast her out in a storm of self-righteous fury, blinded by pride and the deep, insidious poison of betrayal. And she had vanished, swallowed by the world, leaving behind only an echoing silence in the cavernous halls of his life and a single, cold wedding band on her dressing table. For 5 years, that silence had been his companion. For 5 years, the cold weight of that ring in his waistcoat pocket had been his penance, until a sliver of doubt, a careless word from his cousin Marcus, had unraveled the whole rotten tapestry. The doubt had festered into suspicion, then bloomed into a frantic, desperate investigation that had led him here, to this precipice of hope and despair. He had found her. He had found them. And now, this single, devastatingly simple condition. Alistair looked back at the boy, Tom. He saw no fear in those cobalt eyes, only a fierce, unwavering protectiveness that shamed him to his very soul. This child, who had nothing, was prepared to defend his world against a duke who had everything. Slowly, deliberately, Alistair knelt. The movement was alien to him, a gesture of supplication he had never made to any man, not even his king. He brought himself down until his eyes were level with his son's. The damp, salty air filled his lungs, a cleansing scent after years of London's coal smoke and cloying perfumes. "May I have a pen?" he asked, his voice rough. Eleanor flinched in the shadows but did not move. It was the boy who answered, his voice clear and high. "Mamma has one." He did not turn, did not break his solemn watch. Eleanor moved then, a rustle of coarse fabric. She retrieved a pen and a small pot of the same watery ink from a cluttered mantelpiece. She did not approach him. She held it out, and it was Tom who took it, his small fingers carefully closing around the instruments before he passed them to Alistair. A transaction between potentates. Alistair rested the paper on his knee. The cheap wool of his trousers felt abrasive. He dipped the pen, the scratching sound loud in the tense quiet of the cottage, a quiet broken only by the distant cry of gulls and the rhythmic sigh of the sea. He signed his name below the child's demand. Alistair Beaumont, Duke of Blackwood. The signature looked absurdly grand, an invasive species of script on this humble patch of paper. He held it out to the boy. Tom took it, his gaze dropping to the signature, then rising again to his father's face. He gave a single, solemn nod. Then he stepped aside, granting the Duke of Blackwood permission to enter his home. Alistair rose, his joints aching. He felt 100 years old. He stepped over the threshold, into the dim, cramped space that smelled of baked bread, drying herbs, and the faint, clean scent that was uniquely Eleanor. He had crossed the border into their kingdom. Now he had to prove he was worthy of the visa his son had just granted him. The first days were a form of exquisite torture. He did not stay in the cottage. That would have been an invasion, a presumption of intimacy he had not earned. His man of affairs, Finch, had arranged for him to take the old fisherman's cottage at the far end of the cove, a stone hovel that was barely weatherproof. Alistair sent his valet and his carriage back to the nearest town. He would have no liveried servants, no ducal crests, no trappings of the power that had proven so useless in the things that truly mattered. He lived out of a single trunk, rising at dawn to the shriek of gulls, his hands clumsy as he tried to light his own fire with damp kindling. The villagers of Porthgarrow watched him with a mixture of suspicion and morbid curiosity. They knew who he was. News traveled on the wind in a place this small. The great Duke, living in Old Man Hemlock's shack. They kept their distance, their faces closed and wary. They were her people now, not his. He saw Eleanor and Tom every day. He did not approach them. He merely watched. He saw her walk down to the shore in the mornings, her skirts hitched up, to buy fish directly from the boats, haggling with a confidence that stunned him. He saw her in the small garden patch behind her cottage, her back bent as she pulled weeds, her brow furrowed in concentration. He saw Tom, a flash of energy, scrambling over the rocks, his laughter bright and sharp against the roar of the surf. He learned their routines, the rhythm of their life. He saw the way Tom would run to Eleanor, burying his face in her skirts, and how she would smooth his hair, her face softening with a love so fierce and profound it was a physical blow to Alistair. That should have been his life. That should have been his son. That should have been his wife, looking at him with such unguarded tenderness. He had traded it all for a lie. His cousin Marcus was, at this very moment, likely enjoying the comforts of Blackwood House in London, believing himself secure. The investigation had uncovered the full, putrid scope of his deceit. The forged letters, penned by a disgraced clerk Marcus had found in a Fleet Street gutter. The lover, a desperate actor paid to be in the right place at the wrong time. The whispers to Alistair, preying on his pride, on his insecurities about his marriage, a union that had been more contract than connection. Marcus, as the next in line to the dukedom should Alistair remain childless, had gambled everything on severing their bond. And he had won. But the game was not over. Finch was still in London, gathering the final threads. The clerk had been found, terrified and willing to confess in exchange for passage to America. The actor was dead, having drunk himself into an early grave on Marcus's coin. But his landlady remembered the fine gentleman who had paid his rent for a year. The evidence was a hammer, waiting to fall. But here, in Porthgarrow, that hammer was useless. Here the only currency was trust, and Alistair was bankrupt. One afternoon, a week after his arrival, a southerly gale blew in, bringing with it a torrent of freezing rain. From his window, Alistair watched the sea turn from gray to a churning, malevolent black. He saw Eleanor fighting to bring in a line of washing, the sheets whipping like angry ghosts in the wind. He saw a loose slate on her roof flap precariously. He didn't think. He pulled on his boots and a heavy coat and strode out into the storm. The wind tore at him, trying to push him back. He reached her cottage just as she wrestled a heavy linen sheet from the line, her hair plastered to her face, her dress soaked through. She froze when she saw him, clutching the damp linen to her chest like a shield. "What do you want?" she shouted over the howl of the wind. "Your roof!" he yelled back, pointing. "That slate is about to go." She followed his gaze, her expression hardening. "I will manage." "Not in this wind, you won't," he said. "There is a ladder behind my cottage. Allow me." It was not a command. It was a plea. He saw the flicker of indecision in her eyes. It was the practical woman warring with the wounded one. A damaged roof meant leaks, meant misery, meant expenses she could not afford. She gave a short, sharp nod, her lips a thin line. "Fine." He retrieved the ladder, his boots sinking into the mud. Propping it against the cottage wall was a battle against the gale. He climbed, the rung slippery with rain, his city clothes instantly ruined. He felt her eyes on him, a heavy weight on his back. At the top, the wind was a physical force, trying to peel him from the roof. He lay flat, his fine London coat snagging on the rough slate, and shuffled his way to the loose piece. It took all his strength to hold it down and wedge it back into place, his fingers numb and raw. He found 2 other loose slates and secured them as best he could. When he finally descended, soaked to the skin and shivering, she was still there. Tom stood in the doorway, his small face a mask of worry. Eleanor held out a thick, rough towel. It was not an offering of peace. It was a payment for services rendered. "Thank you, Your Grace," she said, the title a deliberate barrier between them. "Alistair," he said, his voice raw. "My name is Alistair." She did not respond. She simply watched him as he took the towel and wiped his face. He could smell the lye soap on it, the scent of her hard-won domesticity. "I made a promise," he said, looking at Tom. "I intend to keep it." He turned and walked back to his own cold, empty cottage, the rain washing over him. It was a start. It was less than nothing, but it was all he had. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean. Alistair found a neatly folded dry towel on his doorstep, along with a small loaf of bread, still warm from the oven. There was no note. None was needed. It was a receipt, not an invitation. He spent the following days in a strange limbo. He sent a missive to Finch, telling him to hold, to not yet move against Marcus. Exposing his cousin and clearing Eleanor's name in London was one thing. Winning her back was another entirely. A public vindication forced upon her would be just another form of ducal command. She had to choose to return. She had to choose him. He learned to be useful in small, unobtrusive ways. He saw her chopping wood, her movements clumsy, her axe strokes inefficient. The next morning, she found a pile of perfectly split logs stacked by her door. He noticed the gate to her garden hung on a single rusty hinge. By noon, it was rehung, swinging smoothly and silently. He never let her see him do it. These were offerings left at the altar of her new life, anonymous acts of penance. He began speaking to the fishermen. At first, they were surly, their answers clipped. But Alistair was a landowner. He knew tides and weather. He knew the economics of a catch. He didn't speak down to them. He asked questions, listened to their complaints about the low prices from the merchants in Truro, and he learned. He spent £100, a pittance to him, to buy a new set of nets for a man whose own were ruined, a man with 6 children to feed. He did it through the village elder, asking that his name be kept from it. But secrets had short lives in Porthgarrow. The fisherman, overwhelmed, told his wife. The wife told the baker, Mrs. Gable, Eleanor's only real friend in the village. And Mrs. Gable, a shrewd woman with kind eyes, told Eleanor. One evening, as Alistair sat on a rock, watching the sun bleed into the horizon, she approached him. She was not wearing her work apron. She had on what was clearly her best dress, a simple gown of dark blue wool, impeccably mended. "The villagers are calling you the Ghost Duke," she said without preamble. Her voice was level, devoid of the sharp edges it had held before. He looked at her. The fading light caught the silver threads that now laced her dark hair, threads he had put there. I imagine they have called me worse." "Some have," she admitted. She stood a few feet away, her arms wrapped around herself as if against a chill, though the evening was mild. "Mrs. Gable says you bought the new nets for John Penrose. The man's family was hungry." It was a simple statement of fact. "It was a kind thing to do." He gave a short, harsh laugh. "Kindness? I'm not a kind man, Eleanor. If I were, we would not be here." "No," she said softly. "We would not." They stood in silence for a long time. The sea whispered its endless secrets to the shore. "Why did you believe him?" she finally asked. The question was quiet, but it landed like a physical blow. It was the question he had asked himself 1,000 times in the dead of night. He turned to face her fully. He owed her the truth, unvarnished and ugly. "Because I was a fool," he said, the words tasting like ash. "Because I was a proud, arrogant fool who trusted the wrong person. He was my cousin, my blood. I grew up with him. It never occurred to me that he could be capable of such poison." He looked out at the water. "And because our marriage was not what it should have been. It was cold. It was distant. I was a poor husband. I gave you my name and my houses, but I never gave you myself. It was easier to believe you had sought comfort elsewhere than to confront the fact that I had given you no comfort at all." He saw her hands tighten. She was trembling. "I loved you," she whispered, so faintly he almost missed it. "Or I was trying to. I was young and terrified of you, of the title, of London. But I saw glimpses of the man behind the Duke. I thought with time." Her voice broke. She stopped. "Eleanor," he said, taking a hesitant step toward her. "Everything you thought, everything you hoped for, it was real. I was the one who was blind to it. He saw it. Marcus saw it. He saw that we were on the verge of something real, and he could not allow it. A child would have ended his ambitions for good." She looked up at him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "And what of the child we had? The child you cast out with his mother?" The raw pain in her voice flayed him open. "I did not know," he said, his own voice cracking. "I swear to you on my title, on my life, on my very soul, Eleanor, I did not know. The doctor, Marcus had paid him too. He told me you were suffering from a nervous affliction. He gave you tonics that made you ill. I thought I was protecting you from the stresses of an heir by not pressing the matter." He saw the truth of it dawn on her face, another piece of the monstrous puzzle clicking into place. The morning sickness, the weariness, all dismissed by Dr. Anselm as feminine hysterics. Another betrayal, another layer of the lie that had entombed their life. "Oh God," she breathed, a hand flying to her mouth. "When I confronted him, the doctor confessed everything," Alistair continued, his voice low and urgent. "Finch has his written statement. He has the forger's confession. He has the proof, Eleanor. All of it." She shook her head, not in denial, but in weary disbelief at the sheer scale of the deception. "And Marcus?" "He knows nothing of this. He sits in my house in London, believing he is safe. I have not acted yet, because your name being cleared by my decree is not enough. Not this time. This has to be your choice. Whether you return, whether you reclaim your name, whether you can ever look at me again without seeing the man who broke your life in two." He reached into his waistcoat and his fingers brushed against the cold, smooth circle of her wedding ring. He did not take it out. It was not time. "Tom," she began, her voice thick with emotion. "Tom is magnificent," Alistair said, a genuine, aching warmth spreading through his chest. "He is bright and brave, and he is the only good thing to have come from all this. He is everything a Blackwood heir should be. He is a boy who grew up in a fishing village, who thinks a duke is a man who fixes roofs, she said, a watery smile touching her lips for the first time. Then he is wiser than most of the House of Lords, Alistair replied. He understands what is real. He saw her resolve waver. He saw 5 years of bitterness and righteous anger warring with a flicker of the woman she had been, the woman who had tried to love him. I cannot, she whispered. I cannot go back to that life, to the whispers, the stares, to being a duchess on a pedestal. Then we will not, he said immediately. We sell Blackwood House. We live at the country estate. We will raise Tom to know the feel of dirt on his hands and the names of the trees. We will live a real life, Eleanor. Not a performance. I swear it to you. She looked at him, truly looked at him, for the first time since he had arrived. She saw not the imperious duke, but a man stripped bare, his pride in ashes at her feet. She saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the deep lines of regret carved around his mouth, and she saw a desperate, terrifying hope. I need time, she said. It was not a no. It was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. The days that followed were different. The tension did not vanish, but it changed its nature. It was no longer the brittle tension of anger, but the humming tension of a string being slowly, carefully tightened. Alistair was granted small audiences. He was permitted to walk with them along the beach, though he kept a respectful distance. He learned about his son in small, precious increments. He learned Tom's favorite stories were about brave knights and clever foxes. He learned the boy could name every seabird that nested in the cliffs. He learned Tom was preternaturally gifted at skimming stones across the water, a skill Alistair, for all his ducal power, had never mastered. Tom, for his part, treated Alistair with the grave curiosity he might afford a strange but interesting piece of driftwood washed ashore. He would ask blunt, startling questions. "Are you very rich?" he asked one afternoon, as Alistair was helping him build a fortress of sand. Alistair paused, a bucket of wet sand in his hand. "Yes, Tom, I am." "Richer than the king?" "Not richer than the king," Alistair said carefully. "But I have a great deal of responsibility." "Mama says responsibility is more important than money," Tom stated, patting a wall of his fortress. Alistair looked at Eleanor, who was watching them from a short distance away, a small, unreadable smile on her face. "Your mother is the wisest person I have ever known." Alistair started to teach Tom to read, not just from primers, but from books on ships and stars he had Finch sent from London. They would sit on the steps of Alistair's cottage, Tom's small, dark head bent close to his, their shared cobalt eyes fixed on the page. During these moments, Alistair felt a fragile, terrifying joy. He was not a duke. He was not a penitent. He was a father. Eleanor watched it all. She saw the patience in Alistair's posture, the genuine delight he took in his son's observations. She saw him talking to the fishermen about setting up a cooperative, using his own funds as collateral to ensure they got a fair price for their catch, cutting out the predatory merchants. He was not throwing money at a problem. He was using his acumen, his power, to build something sustainable. He was using his dukedom for good, here in this tiny corner of the world. The man she was seeing was the man she had once glimpsed, the man she had hoped to find behind the cold facade of the Duke. The anger in her heart, which had been a raging fire for 5 years, was banking. The embers still glowed, hot and dangerous, but they no longer consumed her. In their place, something else was beginning to grow, something tentative and fragile she did not dare name. The crisis came, as it always does, without warning. Finch arrived in Porthgarrow late one night, his face grim. He found Alistair mending a fishing net by candlelight, a skill he had painstakingly learned from one of the old sailors. "Your Grace," Finch said, dispensing with pleasantries. "It is Thorn. He knows." Alistair put down the net. "How?" "The forger. He took your money, but he got greedy. He tried to blackmail Thorne for more before leaving for America. Thorne panicked. He has gone to ground, but before he did, he sent a letter to a gossip columnist at the Post. Alistair's blood ran cold. What did it say? The whole story, Your Grace, but twisted. That you discovered the Duchess's affair, but to avoid scandal, you invented the story of her death and hid her away. That you have kept her prisoner here these 5 years. He paints you as a monster, and himself as the loyal cousin who could no longer bear the secret. It was diabolical. In his desperation, Marcus had crafted one last, perfect lie, a lie that would destroy what little progress Alistair had made. It would reframe his penance as cruelty, his protection as imprisonment. The story runs in 2 days, Finch finished. Alistair stood up. Then we have 1 day. He did not go to Eleanor that night. He let her sleep. He and Finch sat up until dawn, planning. The next morning, he went to her cottage. He found her in the garden, Tom at her side, watering the small vegetable patch. She saw his face and knew immediately that something was wrong. What is it? He told her everything. He told her about Marcus's final, desperate act of vengeance. He laid out the twisted narrative that would soon be consumed by every drawing room in London. She listened, her face pale, her expression unreadable. When he had finished, she was silent for a long moment. He will not stop, she said, her voice flat. He will burn down the world to spite you. To spite us, Alistair corrected gently. This lie hurts you as much as it does me. It makes you a victim, a prisoner. It strips you of the strength and resilience you have shown. It erases the life you built here. The life I was forced to build here, she reminded him, a flash of the old fire in her eyes. Yes, he acknowledged, but you built it. It is yours. I will not let him take that from you. He took a deep breath. There is only one way to combat a lie this public. With the truth, spoken in person, in London. She stiffened. No, I will not be paraded before the Ton as evidence in your feud. Not as evidence, he said, his voice pleading. As a partner, we appear together. We tell the story, our story. We present Finch's evidence. We destroy Marcus not with rumor and innuendo, but with irrefutable fact. We do it on our terms. He saw the fear in her eyes, the deep, instinctual revulsion at the idea of returning to that world. And what happens after? She asked. After the spectacle is over, we simply return to our lives? You to your dukedom, and I to this? He finally reached into his pocket and withdrew the simple gold band of her wedding ring. It lay warm in his palm from 5 years of his body heat. No, he said. After the spectacle, we begin. Whatever life we choose. Together, here or at the estate. We travel. We raise our son. We live. But we do it together, Eleanor, as husband and wife, if you will have me. He did not kneel. He did not make a grand gesture. He simply stood before her, his heart in his hand, offering her the broken pieces of their past and the uncertain promise of a future. She looked at the ring. She looked at his face, at the desperate sincerity in his eyes. She looked at Tom, who had stopped his watering and was watching them with an unnerving wisdom. "Mama," Tom said, his small voice cutting through the tension. "You are crying." Eleanor's hand flew to her cheek. It was wet. But the tears were not of sorrow or of anger. They were tears of release, the melting of a glacier that had frozen her heart for 5 long years. Alistair's face fell. He had broken his promise, the one sacred condition. "I am sorry," he whispered, his shoulders slumping in defeat. But Eleanor shook her head. She looked from Alistair's devastated face to her son's worried one. She knelt, just as Alistair had done, and pulled Tom into her arms. "It is all right, my love," she murmured into his hair. "These are not the sad tears. These are different. She looked up at Alistair over Tom's head, her eyes clear and shining. "I will come with you to London," she said, her voice steady and strong. "We will face him together." Then she held out her hand. Not for the ring. Not yet. She held it out for him. He took it, his fingers closing over hers. Her hand was no longer the soft, delicate thing he remembered. It was strong, capable, calloused. It was the hand of a survivor. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever touched. The return to London was a strategic assault. They did not sneak into the city. They arrived in the Blackwood State coach, polished to a high gleam, drawn by 4 perfectly matched grays. Alistair sat opposite Eleanor and Tom. Eleanor was not dressed as a duchess. She wore the same simple blue wool dress she had worn in Porthgarrow. It was a statement. She was not hiding what she had become. She was proud of it. They did not go to Blackwood House, which was tainted by Marcus's presence. They went to the Dowager Duchess's residence, Alistair's formidable grandmother, who had been alerted by messenger and whose loyalty was absolute. The gossip columns were already in a frenzy with Marcus's story. The Duke was a monster. The Duchess a tragic, hidden figure. Alistair and Eleanor let the furor build for a day. Then they acted. They did not grant an interview to a single newspaper. Instead, Alistair called in every debt, every favor he was owed. He requested a private audience with the Queen herself. It was granted. They went to the palace, the 3 of them. Alistair in formal attire, Eleanor in her blue dress, and Tom clutching her hand, his eyes wide with wonder. In a private chamber, before the most powerful woman in the world, they told the truth. Alistair confessed his folly, his pride, his unforgivable mistake. Eleanor, in a clear, calm voice, spoke of her flight, her new life, and the deception that had cost her 5 years. Finch presented his evidence, the sworn confessions, the bank drafts, the timelines. The Queen, a woman who understood duty and betrayal better than most, listened in stony silence. When they were finished, she looked at Eleanor, then at Tom. "The Blackwood eyes are unmistakable," she said, her voice dry. She then turned her gaze upon Alistair, and it was a gaze that could freeze fire. "You have been a monumental fool, Blackwood, but it appears you are attempting to atone for it." She looked back at Eleanor. "Your Grace," she said, the title a deliberate, public restoration. "You have conducted yourself with a strength that does honor to your station. The crown will not see you maligned." That was all it took. The official court circular, published the next day, announced that the Duke and Duchess of Blackwood, recently returned from an extended private sojourn in the country for the Duchess's health, had been received by the Queen. The message was clear. The official narrative was set. Marcus Thorne was ruined. He was summoned before the Duke and a panel of grim-faced family solicitors. Faced with the evidence, he crumbled. He was stripped of his allowance, his name stricken from the family records. He was exiled, sent to a remote corner of the continent with just enough money to live, but never enough to hold his head up again. His social death was absolute. 2 weeks later, Alistair and Eleanor stood in the grand, empty ballroom of Blackwood House. All the furniture was covered in white dust cloths. The staff had been dismissed with generous pensions. The house was sold. "It is done," Alistair said. The word felt small in the echoing space. Eleanor walked to the tall windows overlooking the square. "I remember standing here, the day after our wedding. I felt like a ghost then. A prisoner." "And now?" he asked, his heart in his throat. She turned to him. "Now I feel free." He walked to her, stopping a few feet away. He held out his hand, palm up. In it lay her wedding ring. "Eleanor Beaumont, Duchess of Blackwood," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are the strongest, bravest, most remarkable woman I have ever known. You have survived my pride, my foolishness, and the cruelty of the world. You have raised a magnificent son. You have taught me the meaning of honor. a lesson I should have already known. I love you. I have loved you from the beginning, though I was too blind and stupid to see it. Will you do me the profound honor of being my wife, in truth this time?" She looked at the ring, then into his eyes. She saw no pride there, no artifice, only a deep, abiding love and a humility that had been forged in the fires of regret. She smiled, a true, radiant smile that lit up the gloomy room. "My mother is not crying," a small voice observed from the doorway. They both turned. Tom stood there holding a small, crumpled piece of paper. It was the contract. Eleanor looked back at Alistair, her smile widening. "No, my love," she said, her voice clear and bright. "She is not." She stepped forward and took the ring from Alistair's hand. Slowly, she slid it onto her finger. It felt different this time. Not like a manacle, but like a promise, a beginning. "Yes, Alistair," she said, "I will." He did not kiss her then. Instead, he simply took her hand, the one with the ring, and held it. They stood together, man, woman, and child, in the empty house that had once been their prison, the silence no longer oppressive, but filled with the infinite, hopeful space of the life they would build together.